I broke Rule 7 last night. Cardinal Orsini's skull won't stop looking at me. Listen, before you think I'm some pazzo who talks to dead people, let me explain something. I've been cleaning these bone walls for 15 years. 15 years of tourists taking selfies with femurs. 15 years of Vatican bureaucrats telling me how to arrange tibias I've been handling since they were in seminary. You work down here long enough, you learn the skull's got opinions about things. The new regulations came down last Tuesday. Some Monsignor Pamphili decided we needed enhanced visitor experience protocols. Fancy words for more tourists, longer hours, less maintenance time. Madonna mia, you'd think after 15 years they'd trust me to know my job, eh? But no, now I got forms to fill out every time I move a bone. Modulo 10, autorizzazione det. My back's been killing me since I started this job, and now they want me hunched over paperwork too. I was reading the new cleaning schedule. They want me to start tourist prep at 5 a.m. now instead of 6. When I heard it, soft, like air moving through teeth that ain't got lips no more. Marcello. Now, I've heard my name called down here before. Echo's funny in these tunnels, sound bounces weird off all the calcium. But this wasn't no echo. This was Cardinal Romano Orsini's skull, third row up from the altar, right side. I know because I've been dusting that particular cranium twice a week for a decade and a half. Got a crack runs from the temple to the jaw. Looks like lightning. You told them about us. Thing is, I hadn't told nobody nothing. Sure, I mentioned to Franco Colana, he's the senior maintenance supervisor, that sometimes the arrangements look different in the morning than I left them at night. But that's just maintenance talk, you know? Like complaining about the boiler or the tourists leaving gum on the holy water fonts. Workplace conversation. But Cardinal Orsini's skull, it was looking right at me. Not the empty socket thing, I mean looking. Like there was something behind the bone seeing me, measuring me. See, here's what they don't tell you in the Vatican Employee Handbook, and believe me, that thing's thicker than the catechism. These bones, they've been down here since 1631. That's almost 400 years of prayers soaking into the marrow, 400 years of pilgrims crossing themselves, 400 years of eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord. You think all that spiritual energy just disappears? Murda, this pain's been with me since year 3 on the job. 15 years of bending over to sweep under bone displays, 15 years of carrying buckets up and down these stone steps. Doctor says I need surgery, but Vatican health insurance. Don't get me started on Vatican health insurance. They'll approve blessed bandages, but not an MRI. Where was I? Right, the skull. The rules exist for protection, it whispered, and I swear on my mother's grave the jaw moved. Just slightly, like it was remembering how to work muscles it ain't had since the Reformation. Rule 7 protects everyone. Rule 7. I knew about the rules, sort of. Every custodian does. Not officially. You won't find them in any Vatican manual, but the way you know which priests tip at Christmas and which ones act like you're invisible. Maintenance knowledge. Passed down from brother Filippo Barberini before his accident. Filippo used to tell me things. During smoke breaks in the service tunnel behind the main display, when the tourists were all gone, and it was just us and the bones. He'd been here 23 years before me, started back when they still used real candles instead of these electric ones that flicker like dying fluorescents. He told me the bones talked to him sometimes. I figured it was just the loneliness getting to him, you know? This job, it ain't exactly social. 15 minutes with tourists asking if the skulls are really real, then 6 hours alone with 4,000 dead Capuchin monks. But Filippo, he'd get this look when he talked about the rules. Serious, like when Father Cosimo used to give the last rites before his transfer. Filippo said the skulls whispered the rules to him, one by one, over the years. Protection protocols, he called them. Ways to keep the chapel balanced. I never asked what happened if you didn't follow them. Should've, because Filippo's accident 3 months later answered that question for me. They found him arranged with the display bones one Tuesday morning. Perfect positioning, like he'd been part of the installation for centuries. Monsignor Pamphili said it was a heart attack, that Filippo must have fallen into the display during the episode. But I seen heart attacks, my father went that way, and people don't fall into perfect liturgical poses when their ticker gives out. They don't end up with their arms crossed over their chest, and their face turned toward the altar like they're praying. The worst part? His eyes were still open, looking up at the ceiling fresco like he was waiting for something, or watching something. After they removed Filippo's body, I noticed Cardinal Orsini's skull had shifted position. Just slightly. like it was watching the space where Filippo had been arranged. That's when I started paying attention to which skulls looked where, when they looked. Rule 7, Cardinal Orsini whispered again, pulling me back. The electric candles were flickering wrong again. I keep putting in work orders about the wiring, but Vatican maintenance says the electrical system is functioning within acceptable parameters. Acceptable to who? The tourists complain about the lighting every damn day. Don't tell anyone about the whispers, I said, surprising myself. The words just came out, like I'd known them all along. That's Rule 7, isn't it? The skull's jaw moved again, definitely moved, and if there'd been lips there, I think it would have smiled. Bene, Marcello. But you already broke it. Madonna mia, my hands started shaking. Not from fear, well, maybe a little fear, but from understanding. The conversation with Franco this morning. I'd mentioned the bones moving positions overnight, hadn't I? Just casual like, the way you mentioned the coffee machine making funny noises, or the heating system rattling. Sometimes the displays look different, I'd said, like someone's been rearranging them. But I'd mentioned it. Every rule broken requires adjustment, Cardinal Orsini continued. Brother Alessandro learned this. Father Cosimo learned this. Now you learn this. Alessandro Farnese. That was before my time, but Filippo told me about him. Another custodian, back in the early 90s. Found dead in the service tunnel, they said. Heart attack, just like Filippo years later. But Alessandro's death, that's when they installed the new security cameras throughout the Vatican. Funny thing about those cameras, they work perfect everywhere except in the bone chapel itself. Down here, they just show static after 6 p.m. Technical difficulties with the sacred environment. Monsignor Pamphili always says when tourists ask about it, the spiritual resonance interferes with electronic equipment. Spiritual resonance. That's one way to put it. Father Cosimo Medici, now, his story I knew better. He was the priest assigned to give tours during my first 5 years here. Real scholarly type, always talking about the historical significance of the arrangements, the theological implications of memento mori. Smart man. Too smart for his own good, maybe. Cosimo got curious about the counting. See, there's supposed to be exactly 4,000 skulls in the main display. That's what all the guidebooks say, what all the tour scripts mention. But Cosimo, he started actually counting them during his evening prayers. Every night after the last tour, compulsive-like, he'd walk through with one of those little clicking counters, muttering numbers under his breath. One morning, I found that clicking counter on the chapel floor, right where Father Cosimo always finished his count. Still had the number showing, 4001. They transferred Father Cosimo to a monastery in Sicily the next week. Spiritual retreat for theological study, they called it. But when I tried to look him up later, just curious, you understand, I couldn't find no record of him arriving at any monastery. No record of him leaving Rome, either. Like he just stopped existing after the transfer paperwork. The skull count went back to 4,000 the day after he left. You understand now, Cardinal Orsini whispered. The other skulls, I was starting to notice, they were all facing this direction. Not toward the altar like they usually do, toward me. The rules keep order. Break them and order adjusts. I wanted to ask about the other rules, but my throat felt dry as tomb dust. 15 years of breathing bone particles down here. 15 years of Vatican air conditioning that works about as well as their health insurance. And suddenly I can't find my voice to save my life. That's when I heard footsteps on the stone stairs. Heavy boots, authoritative step. Security patrol, doing their 11 p.m. rounds. I looked up at Cardinal Orsini's skull, but it had shifted back to its normal position, facing the altar like a good Catholic skull should. Just empty sockets and old calcium, nothing supernatural about it. But when security guard Matteo Caetani reached the bottom of the stairs, his flashlight beam swept across the bone walls, and I swear every skull turned to follow the light for just a split second. Like flowers following the sun, except flowers ain't made of 400-year-old human remains. Evening, Marcello, Matteo said, not noticing anything unusual. Security guards never do. They see what they're trained to see, tourists, troublemakers, broken equipment. Not whispers from centuries-old skulls. Working late again? New regulations, I said, my voice sounding hoarse. Monsignor Pamphili wants everything perfect for tomorrow's VIP tour group. Some German bishops coming through. Matteo made a sympathetic sound. He's good people, comes from a working family like mine. His grandfather was Vatican security too back in the day. Different job, same bureaucratic nonsense. These new rules from upstairs, they're killing all of us, Matteo said, adjusting his radio. Static burst from it for a moment. Electronics always act up down here after dark. Franco was complaining about the overtime requirements. Says the maintenance union's gonna file another grievance. Franco, my supervisor, the one I'd talked to this morning about the bone arrangements changing overnight. Matteo, I said carefully, you ever notice anything unusual down here during night patrols? He shrugged, the flashlight beam dancing across the arranged femurs. It's a crypt full of 400-year-old bones, Marcelo. Everything's unusual by definition. But no, nothing specific. Why? Something bothering you? I opened my mouth to mention the whispers, then stopped. Rule 7. Don't tell anyone about the whispers. But I'd already told Franco about the bones shifting positions, hadn't I? Was that the same thing? Close enough to count? Just wondering, I said instead. Sometimes the acoustics play tricks down here, you know? Echoes from the main cathedral upstairs. Bravo, came Cardinal Orsini's voice, so soft I wasn't sure I'd heard it. But Matteo didn't react, just nodded and continued his patrol through the chapel. After he left, I stood there among the bones for a long time, thinking. 15 years I'd been doing this job. 15 years of tourists and bureaucrats and Vatican politics. But 15 years of something else too. 15 years of slowly learning that the Church's official version of reality. Well, it ain't the only version. My back was really killing me now, that familiar ache that starts in the lower spine and radiates up through the shoulders. Doctor says it's compression fractures from years of heavy lifting. Vatican says it's natural workplace wear and won't approve the surgery. But standing here, surrounded by 4,000 skulls that might or might not be watching me, I started to wonder if the pain was something else entirely. Something like adjustment. The electric candles flickered again, and in that strobe light moment, every skull in the chapel turned to look at me. All of them. 4,000 empty sockets, all focused on one tired maintenance worker who just learned that some workplace safety rules aren't written in any employee handbook. Rule 7. Don't tell anyone about the whispers. But what were the other 6 rules? And what happened when you broke them? Looking at Cardinal Orsini's skull, still facing the altar but somehow still watching me, I had the terrible feeling I was going to find out. The next morning, I couldn't concentrate on nothing. My cleaning routine was all wrong. Started with the femur arrangements instead of the skulls, forgot to check the donation boxes, nearly knocked over one of them fake electric candles while dusting. 15 years of muscle memory, and suddenly my hands don't know what they're doing. Franco Colana was waiting for me in the service tunnel when I took my first break. He's a good supervisor, worked his way up from maintenance like me, understands what it's like down in the crypts. But this morning he looked nervous. Marcelo, he said, lighting up a cigarette even though smoking's technically prohibited in Vatican buildings. Nobody enforces that rule in the service tunnels. We got bigger problems than secondhand smoke. About yesterday, that conversation we had, my stomach dropped. Rule 7. Don't tell anyone about the whispers. But I hadn't told Franco about whispers, had I? Just mentioned the bone arrangements changing overnight. That was different, wasn't it? What about it? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Franco took a long drag, exhaled slowly. I've been thinking about what you said, about the displays looking different in the mornings. He paused, glanced around the tunnel like someone might be listening. Down here, you never know. Thing is, I got the overnight security reports. Last 3 months' worth. He pulled out a manila folder, thick with papers. Vatican bureaucracy. Everything's got to be documented in triplicate. Matteo and the other guards, they do their rounds every 2 hours. Mandatory photos of each chapel area, time-stamped. Franco opened the folder, showed me a stack of black and white security photos. Look at these. The photos were all from the Bone Chapel, taken at different times throughout various nights. 11 p.m., 1 a.m., 3 a.m., 5 a.m. Same angles, same lighting from those malfunctioning electric candles. But Franco was right, something was different in each photo. Here, he said, pointing to a photo from 2 weeks ago, 1 a.m. timestamp. See this skull arrangement in the northeast corner? 3rd row from the bottom. I looked. The skulls were arranged in the standard pattern. Eye sockets facing the altar, jaws aligned for maximum visual impact. Tourist-friendly death. Now look at this one, same night, 3 a.m. The skulls had shifted. Not dramatically, you'd have to know the displays intimately to notice. But 2 skulls had definitely turned, just slightly, like they were looking toward the chapel entrance instead of the altar. And this one, 5 a.m. Back to the original position, facing the altar like good Catholic skulls should. Madonna mia, I whispered, and immediately regretted it. Franco didn't need to hear me sounding like my grandmother at Mass. Gets better, Franco said grimly. He flipped through more photos. This pattern's been going on for months. Different sections, different nights, but always the same thing. Skulls shifting position between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., then back to normal by 5 a.m. The 3 a.m. hour. In seminary. Yeah, I did a year before I figured out the priesthood wasn't for me. They taught us about the 3 a.m. prayer vigils. Some theological nonsense about it being the devil's hour, opposite to the 3 p.m. crucifixion time. I always thought that was superstitious garbage, but down here, surrounded by 4 centuries of bones. Franco, I said carefully, you show these photos to anyone else? He shook his head, stubbed out his cigarette on the tunnel wall. Who I'm going to show them to? Monsignor Pamphili? He'd blame faulty camera equipment. The Swiss Guard? They'd say it's optical illusions from the lighting. Franco laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. You know what happened to the last guy who reported unusual activity in these crypts? I thought I knew, but I let him tell me. Alessandro Farnese. Before your time, but I was here. Started in maintenance same year as Alessandro, 1987. Good worker, took the job serious. But Alessandro, he noticed things. Same things you're noticing now. Franco pulled out another folder, thinner this one. Alessandro kept his own documentation. Found these in his locker after the incident. Look, handwritten notes, dated entries going back months before Alessandro's death. The handwriting started neat, organized, but got more erratic as the dates progressed. March 3rd, 1992, skull arrangement in section C different this morning. Could swear I left them facing altar yesterday. March 10th, 1992, happened again. Section D this time. Maybe I'm more tired than I thought. March 18th, 1992, not tired. Not imagining it. The bones are moving overnight. Need to document this properly. March 25th, 1992, tried to tell Father Benedetti about the movements. He said I was experiencing spiritual distress and needed more prayer time. More prayer time. Like I don't spend 8 hours a day surrounded by praying monks' bones. April 2nd, 1992, the skulls are watching me work now. I can feel the eye sockets following me. This is insane to write, but I know what I'm seeing. April 9th, 1992, heard whispers today. Soft, like wind through teeth. Couldn't make out words, but definitely voices. Multiple voices. April 15th, 1992, the whispers are getting clearer. They're trying to tell me something. Rules, I think. Instructions. April 20th, 1992, Rule 1. Never clean the bones at 3 a.m. The arrangements need to shift. Don't interfere with the shift. The handwriting was getting really messy now, like Alessandro was writing in a hurry or in poor light. April 25th, 1992, Rule 2. Count every skull you touch during cleaning. Stop at 99. Something bad happens if you count to 100. April 30th, 1992, Father Benedetti asked me about my unusual behavior. I told him about the whispers. Mistake. Big mistake. He's talking about psychiatric evaluation and administrative leave. May 5th, 1992, Rule 3. If they whisper in Latin, whisper back in Italian. If they use Italian, stay silent. Getting the language wrong is dangerous. May 10th, 1992, they're going to fire me. Benedetti says I'm unsuitable for sacred work environment. But I can't leave now. The skulls are trying to teach me something important. Rules 4 for survival? For protection? The final entry was barely legible. May 12th, 1992, Rule 4. When the eye sockets follow visitors, evacuate immediately. No exceptions. Rule 5. Replace any fallen bones before dawn. Rule 6. If you hear crying from the bone walls, light exactly 7 candles. Never 6, never 8. Rule 7. Don't tell anyone about the whispers. They found out I told Benedetti. I can hear them getting angry. The whispers are getting louder. I think I understand now. I think I understand what happened to the others. What happens when you break the rules. Oh God, I think they're coming for. The entry cut off mid-sentence. 2 days later, they found Alessandro arranged with the display bones. Murda, I breathed, staring at the notes. My hands were shaking again. Franco, why didn't you report this? Why didn't you tell someone? Franco looked at me like I was stupid. Tell who, Marcelo? Tell them what? that a dead maintenance worker left behind crazy notes about talking skulls. He took the folder back, closed it carefully. You think the Vatican wants documentation about supernatural activity in their tourist attractions? You think they want investigative teams down here, asking questions about how their employees die? He had a point. The Vatican's got a reputation to maintain. Mysterious deaths in the crypts, employees claiming to hear voices from ancient bones. That's not good for the pilgrimage business. Better to call it heart attacks, transfer the troublemakers, keep the donation money flowing. Besides, Franco continued, after Alessandro died, they changed the protocols. New rule, no custodial staff allowed in the crypts between midnight and 6 a.m. Safety measure, they called it. Prevent accidents like Alessandro's. That explained why I'd never experienced the 3 a.m. shift before. 15 years on the job, and I'd always worked day shifts. It was only these new regulations from Monsignor Pamphili that had me working late, staying past the usual hours. Franco, I said, last night I heard whispers too. He went very still. What kind of whispers? Cardinal Orsini's skull. It knew I'd talked to you about the bone movements. Said I'd broken Rule 7. I showed him Alessandro's notes again. Don't tell anyone about the whispers. But I already told you about the arrangements changing, so maybe. Madonna Santissima, Franco muttered, crossing himself. Marcello, you need to listen to me very carefully. You need to request a transfer. Today. Before. Before what? Before I end up like Alessandro? Like Filippo Barberini? I was getting angry now. 15 years I'd worked this job, 15 years of low pay and no respect and bureaucratic nonsense. Now they wanted me gone because some 400-year-old bones were getting chatty. Fuck that, Franco. Excuse my language, but fuck that. Franco grabbed my arm. His grip was strong. He'd been doing maintenance work for 25 years, had the calluses to prove it. This isn't a joke, Marcello. Look at Alessandro's timeline. 2 months from first whisper to arranged corpse. 2 months. And how long for Filippo? Franco hesitated. I don't know exactly when Filippo started hearing whispers. He never documented it like Alessandro did. But he started acting strange about 3 months before his accident. 3 months. Same timeline. I thought about Filippo's last weeks, how he'd gotten quiet during our smoke breaks, how he'd started checking the skull arrangements obsessively, like he was looking for something specific. What about Father Cosimo? I asked. He wasn't custodial staff, but his story fits the pattern too. Franco nodded grimly. Cosimo lasted longer, maybe 6 months. But priests got different rules, different protections. Don't make him immune, just resistant. I pulled out my own notebook. Every maintenance worker keeps one, for work orders and supply lists and bureaucratic documentation. Started writing down what I remembered from last night's conversation with Cardinal Orsini. What are you doing? Franco asked nervously. Same thing Alessandro did, documenting everything. I looked up from my writing. Franco, what if Alessandro wasn't crazy? What if the rules are real and following them keeps you safe? Safe? Franco laughed bitterly. Alessandro knew the rules better than anyone. He still ended up dead. No, I said, thinking it through. Alessandro knew some of the rules. But he broke Rule 7. He told Father Benedetti about the whispers. That's what got him killed, not the other rules. Franco stared at me. So what's your plan, genius? Follow the whisper's instructions and hope for the best. Before I could answer, footsteps echoed in the service tunnel. Heavy, authoritative. Monsignor Pamphili's distinctive stride. I'd heard it enough times over the years to recognize it. Franco quickly stuffed the folders back into his jacket. We both tried to look like we were just taking a routine smoke break, but I could tell from Pamphili's expression when he rounded the corner that we weren't fooling nobody. Signor Vespucci, Signor Colonna, he said in that smooth diplomatic voice all the Vatican administrators learn. I trust you're finding time for your spiritual duties along with your temporal ones. 15 years of dealing with Vatican bureaucrats, and I still couldn't tell when they were being sincere or sarcastic. With Pamphili, I suspected both at the same time. Just discussing the new work schedules, Monsignor, Franco said. Making sure we can accommodate the increased tourist volume without compromising spiritual reverence. Good answer. Franco knew how to talk their language. Excellent, Pamphili said. Signor Vespucci, I wanted to personally inform you about tomorrow's VIP tour. German bishops, as you know, but also some Vatican archaeologists. They're particularly interested in the historical arrangement methodologies of the bone displays. My stomach dropped. Archaeologists meant experts. People who'd notice if skull arrangements weren't exactly as they should be. People who'd ask uncomfortable questions about why bones shifted positions overnight. I trust, Pamphily continued, that the displays will be in perfect liturgical order for their visit? Of course, Monsignor, I said. Everything exactly as it should be. Pamphily smiled, but there was something cold about it. I'm glad to hear it. The church places great trust in your discretion, Signor Vespucci. I would hate for that trust to be misplaced. After he left, Franco and I stood in silence for a long moment. He knows, Franco said finally. Knows what? Knows you're asking questions. Knows we've been talking about unusual activity. Franco lit another cigarette with shaking hands. Marcello, you need to be very careful. The church doesn't like employees who notice too much. I thought about Alessandro's notes, about Filippo's accident, about Father Cosimo's mysterious transfer to a monastery that might not exist. Franco, I said, what if being careful isn't enough anymore? What if the only way to survive this job is to understand the rules completely? That night, I stayed late again. Not because of Monsignor Pamphili's new regulations. I'd finished all the tourist prep by 9 p.m. I stayed because I needed to know more about the rules. If Alessandro was right, if the whispers were instructions for survival, then I needed to learn them all. The chapel was different after the last tour group left. Quieter, but not peaceful quiet. Expectant quiet, like the bones were waiting for something. I started with a systematic examination of every skull arrangement, documenting their positions with my phone camera. If they were going to shift overnight, I wanted proof. Real documentation, not just security photos that could be dismissed as camera malfunctions. That's when I noticed the scratches. Small marks, carved into the stone wall behind the main skull display. Recent scratches, the stone dust was still white, not darkened with age like the rest of the crypt. Someone had been carving words into the wall with something sharp. A key maybe, or a maintenance tool. I had to crouch down and use my phone's flashlight to read them. Rule 1. Never clean bones at 3 a.m. Rule 2. Count skulls, stop at 99. Rule 3. Latin whispers need Italian answers. Rule 4. Eye sockets follow equals evacuate. Rule 5. Replace fallen bones before dawn. Rule 6. Crying walls need 7 candles exactly. Rule 7. Never tell about whispers. The handwriting was different from Alessandro's notes. Newer. These scratches had been made recently. Filippo. This was Filippo's work. He'd learned the same rules Alessandro had discovered, but instead of writing them in a notebook that could be confiscated, he'd carved them into the stone itself. Hidden instructions for whoever came after him. But there was something else carved below the rules. A single word, scratched deeper than the rest. Punishment. And below that a list. Rule 1 broken. Arrangements become permanent. Rule 2 broken. Counter forgets own name. Rule 3 broken. Languages mix, words disappear. Rule 4 broken. Followers cannot look away. Rule 5 broken. Reflection stops working. Rule 6 broken. Wrong number brings screaming. Rule 7 broken. Whispers become orders. I photographed everything, my hands shaking so bad I had to take multiple shots to get clear images. This wasn't just survival instructions, this was a warning system. Each rule wasn't just a guideline, it was a protection against specific supernatural consequences. The clock on my phone showed 11:47 p.m. The security patrol would come through soon, and I needed to be in a normal working position when Matteo arrived. But as I started to move away from the scratched wall, I heard it again. Marcello. Cardinal Orsini's skull, 3rd row up, right side. The crack from temple to jaw catching the light from my phone. You found Filippo's instructions. I looked around the chapel. All the skulls were facing the altar, normal positions. But I could feel them watching me anyway. Rule 7, I whispered back. I broke Rule 7 by talking to Franco. Rules can be amended under certain circumstances, the skull replied. The jaw was definitely moving now, subtle but unmistakable. Filippo learned this. Alessandro did not. What's the difference? Intent. Alessandro told Father Benedetti to seek help, to escape the whispers. Filippo told you to gain allies, to understand the system. The skull paused, and I heard other whispers starting around the chapel. Soft voices in Italian, Latin, languages I didn't recognize. You told Franco to document truth, not to flee from it. The whispers were getting louder. Not threatening, exactly, but urgent. Like they were running out of time to explain something important. The rules serve dual purpose, Cardinal Orsini continued. Protection for the living, order for the dead. But enforcement requires cooperation. Cooperation with who? With us, the previous guardians. Alessandro resisted cooperation. Filippo accepted it, but too late. You have choice still. Footsteps on the stone stairs. Matteo's patrol, right on schedule. The whispers immediately stopped, and I quickly moved to a normal working position, phone tucked away. But as Matteo's flashlight beam swept across the bone walls, I caught something in my peripheral vision. The skulls weren't turning to follow the light like they had last night. They were turning to look at me, all 4,000 of them, waiting for my answer to a question I didn't fully understand yet. After Matteo left, I stayed in the chapel until almost 3 a.m., waiting to see the shift Alessandro and Franco had documented. At 2:47 a.m. exactly, it started. Subtle movements at first. A skull rotating slightly, another tilting forward. Then more dramatic shifts. Entire sections of bone arrangements turning to face different directions. Not random movements, but coordinated. Purposeful. By 3:15 a.m., every skull in the chapel was facing the center of the room. Facing me. And the whispers started again. Not just Cardinal Orsini this time, but dozens of voices. Maybe hundreds. They weren't speaking words I could understand, but somehow I knew what they were saying anyway. It was an offer, and a warning. Join us willingly, become a guardian of the rules, and live as long as the bones endure. Resist the offer, and become another cautionary tale like Alessandro and Cosimo. The choice was mine. But first, I had to survive tomorrow's VIP tour. And something told me that was going to be the hardest test of all. The next morning came too fast. I'd managed maybe 2 hours of sleep after getting home from the chapel, but my mind wouldn't shut up. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 4,000 skulls all turned toward me, waiting for an answer I wasn't ready to give. My alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., earlier than usual because of the VIP tour. German bishops and Vatican archaeologists, Monsignor Pamphili had said, people who'd notice if even one skull was out of place. I got to the Vatican before dawn, used my custodial access to slip into the bone chapel while it was still dark. Had to check if the skulls had returned to their normal positions after 3 a.m., like Franco's security photos suggested they would. They had. Every skull facing the altar again, arrangements exactly as they should be for tourist viewing. Perfect rows, perfect alignment, for centuries of Catholic order restored. If I hadn't seen the shift myself, I'd never believe it happened. But as I started my pre-tour inspection, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One skull, a small one, maybe a child's, had fallen from its position during the night shift. It was lying on the floor beneath the northeast display, jaw separated from the cranium. Rule 5, replace any fallen bones before dawn. I checked my phone, 6:23 a.m. Dawn had passed 20 minutes ago. Murda, I whispered, crouching down to examine the fallen skull. How had I missed this during my 3 a.m. observations? Had it fallen after the skulls rotated back to position? Was I already too late? That's when I realized something worse. The skull on the floor wasn't just any child's skull. It was from the section I'd been photographing last night, documenting the positions. I disturbed the arrangement while taking pictures, knocked something loose without realizing it. I'd broken Rule 5 through my own stupidity. Reflection stops working, I muttered, remembering Filippo's carved warnings. Rule 5 broken, reflection stops working. I pulled out my phone, switched to selfie mode. My face looked back at me from the screen, normal as always. But something felt wrong about it, like I was looking at someone else wearing my features. Footsteps on the stone stairs. Multiple sets, heavier than Matteo's patrol, more authoritative. The VIP tour was starting early. I quickly grabbed the fallen skull pieces, tried to fit them back into the display. But where exactly had they come from? The northeastern section had dozens of child skulls, all similar size, all arranged in the same pattern. Without proper documentation, I was just guessing. Marcello. Franco's voice, but he sounded nervous. More footsteps. He was bringing the tour group down personally instead of letting Matteo handle it. That wasn't normal protocol. I shoved the skull pieces into what looked like the right position, tried to make the jaw align properly with the cranium. Close enough, maybe. Had to be close enough. Marcello, you down there? Franco called again, louder now. Coming. I shouted back, grabbing my cleaning supplies to make it look like I'd been doing routine maintenance. But as I turned toward the stairs, something caught my eye in one of the glass display cases along the wall. My reflection. Except it wasn't moving when I moved. The reflection was standing perfectly still, staring back at me with an expression I wasn't wearing. Calm. Patient. Like it was waiting for something. Rule 5 broken. Reflection stops working. Not stops appearing, stops working. My reflection had become independent. Madonna mia. I breathed, and immediately regretted the slip into dialect. The tour group was close enough to hear now. I forced myself to look away from the glass, headed for the stairs. Whatever was happening with my reflection, I'd deal with it after the tour. Right now I needed to act normal, get through the next hour without anyone noticing supernatural anomalies in the Bone Chapel. Franco was waiting at the top of the stairs with 3 men in expensive suits. German bishops, definitely. They had that particular combination of academic authority and religious smugness that comes with high-ranking church positions. Behind them stood 2 younger men with cameras and measurement equipment. The Vatican archaeologists. "Gentlemen," Franco said in his best diplomatic Italian, "this is Marcello Vespucci, our senior custodial specialist for the Bone Chapel. He's been maintaining these displays for 15 years. Senior custodial specialist. That was a new title. Franco was laying it on thick for the VIPs, making me sound important instead of just another maintenance worker. Herr Vespucci, one of the German bishops said in heavily accented Italian, we are most interested in the historical arrangement methodologies. How exactly are the bones positioned for optimal spiritual impact? Optimal spiritual impact. Jesus Christ, these people talked like they were discussing flower arrangements, not human remains. Well, Your Excellency, I said, falling back on the formal language I'd learned from 15 years of dealing with Vatican hierarchy. The arrangements follow traditional patterns established by the Capuchin monks in the 17th century. Each section represents different aspects of mortality and spiritual preparation. That was the official tour spiel anyway. What I didn't mention was that the bones rearranged themselves every night, or that some of them offered helpful career advice through supernatural whispers. We descended into the chapel, and I immediately felt the attention of 4,000 skulls. Not turned toward us, they were still facing the altar like good Catholic bones, but watching anyway. Waiting. The German bishops were impressed by the artistic arrangements, taking notes about the symbolic positioning of different bone types. The archaeologists were more interested in the preservation techniques, asking technical questions about humidity control and tourist impact. Fascinating, one archaeologist said, photographing the main skull display. The facial positioning suggests deliberate arrangement for maximum psychological effect. Each skull appears to be observing the chapel visitors. You have no idea, I thought. Herr Vespucci, the second bishop said, have you noticed any deterioration in the arrangements over your years of service? Shifting due to structural settling, tourist interference, that sort of thing? A loaded question. He knew something or suspected something. I could see it in his expression. This wasn't casual curiosity. The displays are remarkably stable, Your Excellency, I said carefully. Very little movement or disruption, even with heavy tourist traffic. Remarkable indeed, the bishop murmured, and I caught him exchanging a glance with his colleague. We've heard reports of unusual activity in certain Vatican crypts. Minor anomalies, nothing that would concern the faithful, of course, but enough to warrant periodic investigation. Franco stepped in before I could respond. The Bone Chapel maintains perfect spiritual order, Excellency. Our custodial staff follows strict protocols to ensure appropriate reverence. The archaeologist with the camera moved toward the northeastern section, exactly where I'd replaced the fallen skull. Interesting, he said, adjusting his lens. This particular arrangement seems newer than the surrounding displays. My heart stopped. The skull I'd hastily repositioned. It was obvious to expert eyes that it didn't belong exactly where I'd placed it. Newer? Franco asked, moving closer. The bone patina is different, lighter, as if this skull was recently moved or cleaned. The archaeologist looked at me directly. Have you performed any restoration work in this section recently, Herr Vespucci? Lying to German bishops about supernatural activity was one thing. Lying to Vatican archaeologists about physical evidence was another. These people had training, equipment, professional expertise. They'd know if I was bullshitting them. There was some minor adjustment yesterday, I admitted. Routine positioning correction. Sometimes tourist photography flashes can cause settling over time. The archaeologist nodded, but kept photographing. Of course. Though I must say, the jaw alignment here is quite imprecise compared to your usual standards, almost as if it was replaced in haste. Franco shot me a warning look. We both knew this was heading toward dangerous territory. That's when the whispers started, soft at first, barely audible. But in the enclosed stone space of the chapel, even whispers carried. The German bishops looked around curiously, trying to identify the source of the sound. Ventilation system, Franco said quickly. Old building, complex airflow patterns, sometimes creates unusual acoustic effects. But the whispers were getting clearer. Not random air currents, actual voices. Speaking German. Mein Gott, one of the bishops muttered, recognizing his own language coming from the bone walls. Was ist das? The archaeologists stopped their photography, pulling out acoustic measurement equipment. Professional curiosity overriding caution. Fascinating, one of them said. Definite vocal patterns, multiple sources, clearly articulated consonants. This isn't building acoustics, this is linguistic phenomenon. The whispers switched to Latin, then Italian, then languages I didn't recognize, but the German bishops obviously did. Their faces had gone pale. We should return upstairs, Franco said firmly. The chapel environment can be overwhelming for extended visits. But nobody was moving toward the stairs. The archaeologists were recording everything, and the bishops were listening intently, trying to understand what the voices were saying. That's when I saw my reflection again, in the glass covering one of the wall displays. Still not moving when I moved, but now it was mouthing words along with the whispers. My reflection knew the languages the voices were speaking. Her Vespucci, the first bishop said slowly, how long have you been aware of vocal phenomena in this chapel? The question I'd been dreading. The one I couldn't answer without breaking Rule 7 completely. I'm not sure what you mean, Your Excellency, I said, but my voice sounded wrong even to me. Uncertain. Guilty. The whispers, Her Vespucci. The voices speaking in multiple languages from locations that contain no living people. The bishop's tone had shifted from academic curiosity to interrogation. This is not a new phenomenon, is it? Franco tried to intervene again, but one of the archaeologists held up a hand for silence. His equipment was picking up something significant. Remarkable, he said, studying his acoustic readings. The sound sources are distributed throughout the bone displays, but the vocal patterns suggest coordinated speech. Almost like a conversation. A conversation between whom? The second bishop asked. Between 4,000 dead Catholics who've been trapped in these walls for centuries, I thought. Between previous custodians who learned the rules too late. Between monks and priests and holy men who discovered that death doesn't always mean rest. But I couldn't say that. Rule 7. Don't tell anyone about the whispers. I don't know, I lied. The bishop stared at me for a long moment. Her Vespucci, are you familiar with the case files of Alessandro Farnese and Filippo Barberini? My blood turned to ice water. They were previous employees. Both died in accidents. Accidents, the bishop repeated. Yes, that's the official record. Heart failure in Alessandro's case, accidental fall for Filippo. Both while working alone in this chapel during nighttime hours. He pulled out a manila folder. Seemed like everyone had files on the dead custodians. Both men also filed reports about unusual acoustic phenomena in the months before their deaths. Reports that were dismissed as stress-related psychological symptoms. Franco stepped closer to me, protective instinct kicking in. Your Excellency, if you're suggesting that Marcello is experiencing similar stress, I'm suggesting, the bishop interrupted, that this chapel has a documented history of affecting the mental stability of its custodial staff. And I'm wondering if Her Vespucci has been experiencing similar influences. The whispers suddenly stopped. Complete silence, more unnerving than the voices had been. In the quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat, Franco's nervous breathing, the archaeologist's equipment humming. Then from Cardinal Orsini's skull, third row up, right side, came a single whisper in perfect German. Versteht die Regeln nicht. He doesn't understand the rules. The German bishops heard it clearly. Both of them turned toward the skull display, staring at the exact spot where Cardinal Orsini's remains rested. Mein Gott, the first bishop breathed. Das war eine direkte Antwort. That was a direct response. The archaeologist with the acoustic equipment was frantically adjusting his settings. The source point is definitive, northeast section, third vertical row. But there's no mechanism for sound production in that location. Unless, the second bishop said quietly, the sound production is not mechanical. Franco grabbed my arm. We're leaving. Now. But as we started toward the stairs, something happened that stopped everyone cold. Every skull in the chapel, all 4,000 of them, turned in perfect unison to look directly at the German bishops. Not at me this time. At them. Règles doivent être suivies, comme à whisper in French. Rules must be followed. Las reglas protegen a todos in Spanish. The rules protect everyone. Правила существуют не просто так, in Russian. The rules exist for a reason. The bishops were backing toward the stairs now, but the archaeologists seemed transfixed. One of them was still recording, still taking measurements, treating this like a fascinating scientific phenomenon instead of a supernatural confrontation. We need to evacuate immediately, Franco said, using his emergency authority voice. Chapel is closed for maintenance. But the whispers were getting louder, more insistent. And they weren't just random languages anymore. They were speaking directly to each member of the tour group in their native tongues. Herr Doctor, came a voice in perfect academic German, addressing the first archaeologist. Ihr Mesungen werden nix erklären. Manche Dinge existieren jenseits der Wissenschaft. Your measurements will explain nothing. Some things exist beyond science. The archaeologist stopped recording, stared at his equipment like it had betrayed him. That's impossible. The acoustic signature indicates multiple speakers, but the linguistic complexity suggests individual consciousness. Dead tissue cannot produce coordinated speech patterns. Dead tissue, Cardinal Orsini's voice replied in Italian, is an inadequate description of our current condition. That's when the eye sockets started following us. Rule 4. When the eye sockets follow visitors, evacuate immediately. Every skull in the chapel, not just turned toward us anymore, but actually tracking our movements with their empty sockets, like they were watching through eyes that no longer existed. Everyone out, I shouted, abandoning all pretense of normalcy. Get out of the chapel now. Franco was already pushing the bishops toward the stairs, but the archaeologists were reluctant to leave. Too much professional curiosity, not enough survival instinct. Just a few more measurements, one of them started to say. No! I grabbed his equipment, started pulling him toward the exit. You don't understand, there are rules about this. The whispers exploded into a cacophony of voices. Hundreds of languages, thousands of words, all speaking at once. Not threatening exactly, but overwhelming. Like every soul that had ever been interred in these walls was trying to communicate simultaneously. We stumbled up the stone stairs, the German bishops practically running now, Franco and I dragging the archaeologists behind us. But as we reached the chapel entrance, I heard one final whisper in clear Italian. Marcello, you have chosen your side. I turned back for just a moment, saw my reflection in the glass display case at the bottom of the stairs. It was smiling at me now, raising one hand in what might have been a wave or a blessing. Then Franco slammed the chapel door behind us, and we were standing in the bright Vatican corridor, breathing hard and trying to process what had just happened. The German bishops were already on their phones, speaking rapidly in German to whoever answered. The archaeologists were reviewing their recordings, comparing equipment readings, trying to find rational explanations for impossible phenomena. Herr Vespucci, the first bishop said after ending his call, you will report to Monsignor Pamphili's office immediately. This incident requires extensive debriefing. Franco started to object, but I held up a hand to stop him. I understand, Your Excellency. As the tour group departed, walking much faster than they'd arrived, Franco pulled me aside. Marcello, what the hell just happened down there? I thought about the rules carved into the stone wall, about Alessandro's notes, about Filippo's warnings, about the choice the whispers had offered me last night, and the choice I'd apparently made by protecting the tour group from the supernatural phenomena. I think, I said slowly, I just became the chapel's new guardian. Franco stared at me. What's that supposed to mean? Before I could answer, Monsignor Pamphili appeared at the end of the corridor, walking toward us with that measured diplomatic stride. But there was something different about his expression, not the usual bureaucratic neutrality, but something that looked almost like relief. Signor Vespucci, he said as he approached, I trust your interaction with our German colleagues was illuminating? The word choice was deliberate. Illuminating. Not educational or informative, illuminating. Like he knew exactly what had happened in the Bone Chapel. Yes, Monsignor, I said carefully. Excellent. Please follow me to my office. We have much to discuss about your future responsibilities. Future responsibilities. Not disciplinary action, not termination, not psychiatric evaluation like Alessandro and Filippo had faced. Responsibilities. As we walked toward Pamphili's office, I caught my reflection in a window overlooking the Vatican courtyard. It was moving normally now, synchronized with my movements. But there was something different about my face in the glass, a subtle change in expression, like I was seeing the world through slightly different eyes. Rule 5 broken. Reflection stops working. But maybe I thought it had started working differently instead. Maybe the reflection I'd seen in the chapel hadn't been a malfunction. Maybe it had been a preview of who I was becoming. The choice the whispers had offered me wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about transformation. About becoming something more than just a custodial worker who happened to hear voices from ancient bones. About becoming their guardian, their protector, their voice in the world of the living. And as we entered Monsignor Pamphili's office, I realized that maybe that wasn't such a terrible thing after all. Monsignor Pamphili's office wasn't what I expected for a disciplinary meeting. No formal desk setup, no intimidating religious artwork, no uncomfortable chairs designed to make you squirm. Instead, he'd arranged 2 leather armchairs facing each other near the window, with a small table holding coffee and what looked like personnel files. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "Coffee? You look like you need it." I did need it. My hands were still shaking from the chapel incident, and the strange business with my reflection had left me feeling disconnected from my own body. "Grazie, Monsignore." He poured 2 cups, settled into the opposite chair, and opened the top file folder. 15 years of exemplary service, Marcello. No disciplinary actions, no complaints from visitors, no violations of Vatican protocol. Until yesterday. Here it comes, I thought. The formal reprimand, the transfer to some mundane maintenance job, maybe even termination. All because I'd finally acknowledged what every Bone Chapel custodian knew but couldn't talk about. "Tell me about the rules," Pamphili said quietly. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. "Monsignor?" "The rules, Marcello. The ones carved into the stone wall behind the main altar. The ones Alessandro Farnese documented before his death. The ones Filippo Barberini tried to share with his replacement." He opened another file. "The ones you've been following faithfully for 15 years without ever reporting them officially." My mouth went dry. "I don't know what." "Rule 7, Pamphili interrupted. "Don't tell anyone about the whispers." "Yes, I'm familiar with all 7 rules. What I want to know is why you chose to break that rule today." The question hit me like a physical blow. Why had I broken Rule 7? Not intentionally, not planned, but when those German bishops were standing in the chapel listening to supernatural voices speaking their native languages, when the archaeologists were treating 4,000 dead souls like an interesting acoustic phenomenon. They were going to exploit it, I said finally. Turn it into some kind of research project. Study the bones like they were just artifacts. Pamphili nodded. The German bishops represent a Vatican investigative committee. They've been documenting supernatural phenomena in Catholic sites across Europe, building evidence for larger institutional decisions. What kind of decisions? Instead of answering directly, he pulled out a photograph from the bottom file. It showed the bone chapel, but not as I knew it. The bones were arranged differently, in stark geometric patterns instead of the flowing artistic displays. Clinical, cold, museum-like. "This is the proposed renovation plan," Pamphili said. "Approved by the Committee for Sacred Site Modernization. Complete reorganization of the bone displays for optimal tourist efficiency and scientific accessibility." I stared at the photograph, felt something cold settle in my stomach. They want to destroy the arrangements. They want to rationalize them, remove the inconsistencies that interfere with systematic study, create a more controlled environment for academic research. He put the photograph away. The committee believes supernatural phenomena should be documented, cataloged, and managed through proper institutional channels. Managed, I repeated, like the bones are some kind of problem to be solved. Exactly. Pamphili leaned forward. What they don't understand is that some things cannot be managed, Marcello. Some things can only be tended. The word hung in the air between us. Tended. Not controlled, not studied, not exploited. Tended like a garden, or a flock, or a sacred trust. The previous guardians, I said slowly. Alessandro and Filippo. They weren't casualties. They were replacements. Alessandro lasted 8 years before the responsibilities became too much for him. Filippo managed 12. Both died peacefully, in their sleep, after the chapel had chosen their successors. Pamphili's expression softened. Death isn't a punishment in this role, Marcello. It's a graduation. My reflection in the window behind him looked normal now, but I could feel something different about it. Like there was more weight behind my eyes, more presence in my movements. What happened to me down there? The reflection thing? The chapel was evaluating your suitability for expanded responsibilities. Your reflection became independent because the bones needed to see if you could function with a divided consciousness. Part of you remaining in the world of the living, part of you joining their eternal conversation. That made a horrible kind of sense. And I passed the test. You protected both the living and the dead. You evacuated the tour group when they were in danger, but you also prevented the chapel from being violated by institutional exploitation. The bones recognized that balance. Pamphily stood, walked to his desk, returned with a sealed envelope bearing my name in formal script. Your promotion is effective immediately. Senior Custodial Guardian, Apostolic Bone Chapel. New job description, new authorities, new requirements. I opened the envelope, scanned the official Vatican letterhead in formal language. But underneath the bureaucratic text was a handwritten note in what looked like Alessandro's writing. The whispers become clearer with time. Don't fight them. They're not taking anything away. They're giving you the ability to hear what was always there. AF. Below that, in different handwriting, the chapel chooses its guardians carefully. Trust the bones. They've been protecting this place longer than the Vatican has existed. FB. Alessandro and Filippo, I said. They're still tending the chapel, yes. From a different vantage point, but their service continues. Pamphily returned to his chair. The role of guardian is comprehensive, Marcello. You'll continue your custodial duties, but you'll also serve as interpreter between the living and the dead, protector against institutional exploitation, and when necessary, mediator for supernatural conflicts. Conflicts? The Bone Chapel isn't the only sacred site in the Vatican with active, spiritual residents. Sometimes they disagree with each other. Sometimes they need someone who can speak both languages, living and dead, to resolve disputes. The scope of what he was describing was staggering. Not just one supernatural workplace, but an entire network of them throughout the Vatican. All requiring careful management, all needing guardians who could navigate between worlds. Why me? I'm just a maintenance worker who happened to hear voices. You're a maintenance worker who heard voices for 15 years and never tried to exploit them, study them, or profit from them. You accepted them as part of your responsibilities and learned to work with them instead of against them. Pamphily smiled. That's exactly the qualification the bones were looking for. I thought about the German bishops, about their plans for systematic documentation and institutional control, about what would happen to 4,000 souls if they were reorganized into optimal tourist efficiency. The committee won't give up easily, I said. No, they won't, which is why your new position includes certain authorities to protect sacred sites from inappropriate interference. He handed me another document, this one bearing multiple Vatican seals and signatures. Apostolic Authority for Spiritual Site Protection. You now have the right to refuse access to any individual or group whose presence would compromise the spiritual integrity of sites under your guardianship. I stared at the document. Official Vatican authority to tell bishops and archaeologists to fuck off if they threaten my chapel. Power I'd never imagined having, responsibility I'd never wanted. But looking at it, I realized I did want it. Not the power itself, but what it would protect. The conversations between ancient souls, the warnings that kept visitors safe, the delicate balance between the living and the dead that had been maintained for centuries. There's one more thing, Pamphily said, pulling out a final file. Your predecessor left detailed notes about the chapel's extended community. Souls beyond the bone displays who consider the space their eternal home. You'll need to establish working relationships with all of them. He opened the file, revealing pages of handwritten observations in multiple hands, Alessandro's neat script, Filippo's hurried scrawl, and others I didn't recognize. Maps of supernatural activity throughout the Vatican, schedules of spiritual events, protocols for managing conflicts between different ghostly factions. How many guardians are there? I asked. Active? 7, including yourself. Retired? He gestured vaguely. The Vatican has been accumulating spiritual residents for over 1,500 years, Marcello. Most of them require minimal attention, but some need active management. 7 guardians for supernatural Vatican sites. A whole hidden bureaucracy dedicated to managing the afterlife's relationship with the Catholic Church. It was bigger than I'd imagined, more complex than I'd understood. And somehow, I'd become part of it. The promotion comes with a substantial salary increase, Pamphily added. Housing allowance, hazard pay, and full Vatican diplomatic immunity for actions taken in your official capacity. The church takes care of its spiritual employees. Spiritual employees. Like I was now technically working for both the living Vatican and the dead Catholics who refused to leave it. When do I start? You started 15 years ago, Marcello. You just didn't know it was an interview period. Pamphily closed the files, stood to shake my hand. Welcome to your official duties, Guardian Vespucci. Guardian Vespucci. It had a nice ring to it, actually. As I left Pamphily's office, envelope of promotion documents in hand, I felt the weight of 4,000 souls settling into my consciousness. Not overwhelming, not intrusive, but present. Like a conversation happening in the next room that I could join whenever I needed to. My reflection in the corridor windows looked the same as always, but I could feel the difference. Part of me was still walking through Vatican hallways, dealing with bureaucracy and tourist schedules and maintenance requests. But part of me was already back in the Bone Chapel, listening to ancient whispers, learning the deeper rules that govern the space between life and death. Franco was waiting for me near the custodial offices, obviously worried. Marcello, what happened? Are you in trouble? Promoted, I said, showing him the official letter. Senior Custodial Guardian. Substantial raise, new responsibilities, diplomatic immunity. He stared at the document, then at me. Guardian of what? Officially? The Bone Chapel and associated sacred sites. I grinned. Unofficially? For 1,000 Catholic souls who've been waiting centuries for someone to take their concerns seriously. Franco looked confused, but before he could ask more questions, I heard a familiar whisper in my ear, Cardinal Orsini's voice, speaking clearly in Italian. Well done, Guardian. The chapel is pleased with your choice. I turned toward the sound, saw my reflection in Franco's office window. It waved at me again, but this time I waved back. Marcello, Franco said slowly. Are you feeling all right? You just waved at nothing. Not nothing, I corrected. Just nothing you can see yet. He was quiet for a moment, processing that. Yet. The chapel chooses its own timeline for revelations, Franco. When it's ready for you to understand more, you'll understand more. I started toward the Bone Chapel entrance. For now, just know that the Vatican's spiritual residents are in good hands. As I descended the stone stairs back into the chapel, I felt the familiar presence of 4,000 souls arranging themselves to welcome me home. Not as a visitor this time, not as a maintenance worker or even a custodian. As their guardian, their voice in the world of the living, their protector against institutional exploitation and bureaucratic rationalization. The whispers that had frightened me for 15 years now sounded like welcome home greetings. Each skull turned slightly in my direction, not the supernatural threat that had terrified the German bishops, but simple acknowledgement of my new status. Bentornato, Guardiano, came a chorus of voices in dozens of languages. Welcome home, Guardian. I picked up my cleaning supplies, began my routine inspection of the bone displays. Same work I'd been doing for 15 years, but with deeper understanding of why it mattered. Not just maintaining tourist attractions or preserving historical artifacts. Tending 4,000 souls who had chosen to remain in service to the church they'd loved in life, who now served as protectors and advisors and witnesses to the Vatican's spiritual mission. My phone buzzed, text message from an unknown number. Congratulations on your promotion, Guardian Vespucci. Looking forward to working with you. G. Toriani, Sacred Library Guardian. Another Guardian, welcoming me to the unofficial network. Within minutes, more messages arrived from Guardians I hadn't known existed. Crypt Guardian, Garden Guardian, Archive Guardian, Chapel Guardian. A whole hidden community of Vatican employees who spent their days managing the church's relationship with its supernatural residents. Each protecting their own sacred sites, each serving as intermediary between the living and the dead. I was part of something larger now, something that had existed for centuries, maintaining the delicate balance that allowed one of the world's most spiritually active institutions to function without collapsing under the weight of its own accumulated holiness. As I worked, the whispers provided gentle guidance about my new responsibilities, which bones needed special attention, which visitors might cause problems, which Vatican officials could be trusted with partial knowledge of supernatural activities. The rules carved into the stone wall still applied, but now I understood them as guidelines rather than restrictions. Ways to maintain safety and secrecy, while still allowing the chapel's spiritual residents to participate in the life of the church they'd never truly left. By the time I finished my work and prepared to leave for the day, I felt more connected to the Bone Chapel than I ever had. Not just as its custodian, but as its voice, its protector, its link to the world beyond the stone walls. The last whisper I heard as I climbed the stairs was Cardinal Orsini speaking in perfect Italian. The Vatican's dead outnumber its living by thousands to one, Guardian. We've been waiting a long time for someone who understood that we're still Catholics, even without heartbeats. I paused at the chapel entrance, looked back at 4,000 skulls all facing the altar in perfect devotional order. I understand, I said aloud, and I'll make sure the living understand too. As I locked the chapel door behind me, I caught my reflection one more time in the glass panel. Normal now, synchronized with my movements, but carrying something extra. A depth that came from serving as bridge between two worlds, protector of ancient souls, guardian of sacred spaces that existed beyond the reach of institutional bureaucracy. Guardian Vespucci, Vatican employee, keeper of rules that maintain balance between life and death. It was going to be interesting work.